Now I would like to invite to the stage for a commitment update and the announcement of a new one, Randy Weingarten, the leader of the American Federation of Teachers, and Sean McGarvey of North America's Building Trades Union. Let's give them a big hand. First, I want to give the delegates here an update that we announced yesterday at a press conference. We have sustained a very large decline in America's infrastructure spending just at the time when we should have been increasing it. And for those of us who had hoped that a national infrastructure bank would be created by the Congress, especially since it has broad bipartisan support in the Congress, which gives me help, I think it's important to point out that today's GDP report, which was sort of discouraging, obscures the fact that the next quarter will almost certainly be booming, because in this 3-month period, they said we had a decline in GDP in spite of the fact that manufacturing employment and production picked up and overall employment picked up. You'd say, well, how could there have been a decline? One difficult thing, which is that North America and a lot of Northern Europe, a lot of our customers had the worst winter they had in more than 20 years, which led to a buildup of inventories and an overhang of economic distress. And secondly, a good news story, healthcare spending contributed less to the GDP calculations because we are now in our 4th year where health inflation is under 4% for the first time in more than 50 years. So, nonetheless, we're not spending enough on infrastructure, and we ought to spend more, especially since interest rates are lower than inflation, which means that since infrastructure projects are as close as you can get to a sure thing for a rate of return, it's like free money. And what Randy, Steve, and the other investors at the AFL-CIO, led by Rich Trumpka, flowing out of a conversation I had with him when we ran into each other at the World Economic Forum several years ago, what they have done is to invest the pension funds of unions and public employee organizations, especially the 2 big ones in California, for whom we're very grateful, in infrastructure which will give them a return greater than the targeted average return they seek for their pension funds. So they are actually doing right by the people whose pensions they're charged with protecting and making a major contribution to the American economy. The AFL-CIO committed 3 years ago to raise $10 billion from these sources for an infrastructure fund within 5 years. It's been 3 years. They have exceeded $10 billion in 3 years, $10.2 billion. In addition to that, under the leadership of Sean McGarvey, the buildings trades have trained more than 900,000 people to do this work as infrastructure picks up around the country, so that as more people copy what the AFL-CIO has pioneered, and particularly if the government should be able to parlay this bipartisan support into a national infrastructure bank, the workers will be there to do the job. Of the $10 billion committed, $3 billion are actively deployed to projects, but only $1 billion has been actually spent. That $1 billion resulted in employment for 33,500 people. So when you triple that, we're going to have well over 250,000 jobs coming into the American economy just from what they have done, and I think we owe them a big round of applause for that. So I thank them and all those they represent. And I have the honor to bring to the stage to announce a new commitment building on their model, the governor of Maryland, Martin O'Malley, who was previously the mayor of Baltimore and who I believe has been a terrific governor. Maryland has now the highest median income in America. They have some of the best performing schools in our country. I told some people earlier this morning that if they were separate nations, the schools, all the schools of Massachusetts, Minnesota, and Maryland would be in the top 10 in the world if they were separate nations in education performance. And they did it by making a commitment to excellence in teaching, excellence in principles, and working for over the long term to improve the quality of instruction and raise the standards for all of our kids. They did it the old-fashioned way, and I'm convinced the only way to achieve excellence is how Finland built one of the greatest education systems in the world. It's how Shanghai developed from a rather mediocre system a decade ago into perhaps the best big city system in the world. And that's just one of the many things Martin O'Malley has done. Maryland, at least twice during his two-term tenure, has been voted the best run state in the country. And last night, his lieutenant governor, whom he endorsed, won an overwhelming victory in the primary election for governor of Maryland, and I think will succeed him, showing that the people of Maryland like where they're going and believe in what they're doing. So please join me in welcoming Governor Martin O'Malley. I should also tell you, since you probably look at us and tell that we share an Irish heritage, that while he was doing all this, he has a beautiful voice, and he's the lead singer in an Irish band. Go figure. The platform is yours.
I don't know whether to sing or make the commitment. No. Mr. President, thank you so very, very much. And the commitment that that I'm here to make on behalf of Maryland is to lead a group and take the initiative to pull together a mid-Atlantic infrastructure exchange so that we can bring the region of that whole Chesapeake area, nation's capital, Virginia, and Maryland together to find ways that we can access more pension investments and private capital to put with the big investments we've now made on both sides of the Potomac to invest in infrastructure, to get people back to work. We've modernized our transportation funding, and we're poised for greatness. But we know, Mr. President, from your leadership and your example, that these things don't happen by themselves. They require collaboration and partnership. So we're committed to pulling together this mid-Atlantic infrastructure exchange based on what we've seen our neighbors do out west. And we thank you for pulling us together for this.